It was a bright afternoon in the middle of the city, and the sun was warm and soft, and the sky was full of light, with not a single cloud above. The city park was alive with laughter and voices and movement all around as kids ran across the grass and parents talked on benches and dogs chased after sticks and toys. There were balloons tied to fences and music playing softly from a small speaker near the fountain, and the air smelled like popcorn and cotton candy from a nearby stand. In the middle of this busy park was a little girl with big brown eyes and a pink dress that had tiny white flowers all over it, and her name was Lily. She stood near the edge of the playground with her small hands by her side and her eyes wide and her lips slightly open like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Lily had come to the park with her mother, who wore high heels and a black suit and was talking fast on her phone while walking back and forth on the sidewalk. Her mother was a CEO at a big company, and she was always working and always rushing and always saying she didn't have time to waste. Lily was used to waiting and watching and trying to be good and quiet and still while her mother handled important things that Lily didn't understand. But today felt different, and Lily didn't feel okay, and something inside her chest felt heavy and fast, and she didn't know why. There were too many people and too many voices and too many colors and sounds, and her head felt full like a balloon ready to pop. She tried to look for her mother, but her mother had her back turned and was still talking and laughing into her phone without noticing Lily was no longer by the bench. Lily's hand started to shake a little, and she dropped her toy bunny on the ground and stared at it, but couldn't move to pick it up. Her heart was beating faster and faster, and her breathing became short and shallow like she couldn't get enough air, and her legs felt weak like jelly. She sat down on the ground and hugged her knees close to her chest and rocked back and forth and wished everything would go quiet and slow again. But nothing slowed down, and the world kept spinning, and the noise kept growing, and no one seemed to see her sitting there in the middle of the path. Children kept running past her, and parents kept walking and talking and pushing strollers and eating ice cream, and no one stopped to ask if she was okay. Some looked at her for a second, then looked away like they didn't know what to do, or maybe thought she was just having a tantrum. But this was not a tantrum, and Lily was not crying for attention, and she wasn't trying to get a new toy or more candy. She was scared and confused, and her body felt like it didn't belong to her, and her mind was loud with worry and panic and fear she couldn't explain. And still her mother didn't see her, and still her mother kept talking and moving and nodding and smiling at her phone like everything was fine. Lily felt alone in the middle of so many people, and that made the fear worse, and she wanted someone to notice her and help her and tell her it was going to be all right. She wanted to be home in her room with the soft lamp and the quiet music and the smell of her stuffed animals and the feeling of her blanket around her shoulders. She wanted her mom to hold her and look at her and ask what was wrong and take her away from the crowd and the noise and the spinning inside her head. But nothing happened and nothing changed, and Lily kept sitting there with her knees to her chest and her bunny on the ground beside her. More kids came running by, and one almost stepped on her toy but didn't even stop to say sorry, and Lily just watched the bunny roll to the side. The sun was still shining, and the music still played, and the balloons still floated in the air like nothing was wrong at all. But something was very wrong, and Lily was not okay, and no one around her could see it, because no one was really looking. Until one person did, and that moment changed everything. Across the playground, a man sat on a bench with a small boy next to him, and he noticed Lily sitting alone, and he didn't look away. He saw the fear on her face, and the way her body shook, and the way she held her knees like she was trying to hide from the world. The man leaned forward and whispered something to his son, and then slowly stood up and began to walk toward the little girl. He didn't know who she was, and he didn't know what had happened, but he knew that look because he had seen it before. He had seen it in someone he loved more than anything in the world. And that was the moment the story truly began. The man's name was Daniel, and he had soft eyes and kind hands, and he wore a simple blue shirt with a stain from ice cream on the sleeve where his son had hugged him earlier. He did not walk fast or loud or sudden, because he knew that fear does not like fast or loud or sudden, and sometimes the best help comes with silence and care. His son held his hand for a moment, then let go, and sat quietly on the bench, and watched his dad step forward toward the girl, who was still sitting on the ground like a stone in the river. Lily didn't look up, because she didn't want to see more people walking past her or pretending not to notice her or pretending she didn't matter at all. She was still holding her knees close, and her eyes were filled with tears that didn't fall yet because even her tears felt stuck inside. Her small chest was moving up and down too fast, and her fingers were red from gripping her legs so tight, and she didn't hear anything except the pounding inside her ears. Daniel stopped a few steps away and slowly crouched down, not too close, not too far, just close enough to let her know he saw her. He didn't speak at first, and that was important because sometimes words can make fear worse and silence can feel like safety when everything else feels loud and sharp. Then, in the softest voice, he said, "Hey there, I'm Daniel, and I saw your bunny on the ground, and I thought maybe she was scared too." Lily blinked slowly and turned her head, just a little, not much, but just enough to see the man kneeling there with soft eyes and no phone in his hand. He gently picked up the toy bunny and held it like it was something precious, not just a stuffed toy, but something real and important and loved. "Is this hers?" he asked, holding the bunny toward Lily with both hands like it was something magical. Lily nodded just a little, and her lips trembled like she wanted to say, "Thank you," but the words were still hiding somewhere deep inside. Daniel placed the bunny beside her and smiled, then sat on the grass and looked up at the sky like he had nowhere else to be and nothing more important than this moment. He said, "Sometimes I come here with my son when things feel too heavy and the air feels too thick and the noise feels like too much." Lily looked at him again, and this time her eyes stayed on him for more than a second, because something about his voice and his stillness felt safe, like a quiet room during a storm. Daniel continued, not rushing, not forcing, just talking like one might talk to the wind or the clouds or the stars above. He said, "My son's name is Max, and sometimes he gets scared too. And when that happens, we blow bubbles, because bubbles are soft and slow, and they don't ask anything from you." Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small plastic bottle with a pink cap and a tiny wand, and he held it up and said, "Would it be okay if I made some bubbles for you and your bunny?" Lily didn't speak, but she didn't shake her head either, and that was enough for Daniel to know it was okay to try. He dipped the wand into the bottle and gently blew, and a soft round bubble floated into the air like a tiny moon made of light and water and air. Lily watched as the bubble floated up, then down, then sideways, and popped gently on a leaf nearby. Then he made another, and each one danced through the air like a little secret, and Lily's eyes followed them without blinking. Her breathing began to slow just a little, and her grip on her knees loosened just enough for her fingers to uncurl. Daniel didn't say anything more, he just kept blowing bubbles and letting the quiet do the work that words could not do. Max came over and sat near his dad and started chasing the bubbles with quiet laughter and open hands, and Lily watched him too. For a moment the world didn't feel so loud or big or scary, and the noise in her chest was softer, like a song played far away. Then Lily reached out and popped a bubble with her finger and smiled just a little, like a whisper on her face. Daniel smiled too and said, "That was a good one, you have great timing." And though Lily didn't speak, her eyes said thank you, and her shoulders slowly began to drop from her ears, and the shaking inside started to calm. Her mother still hadn't noticed, and was still walking in circles with her phone and her business voice and her tall heels tapping the ground. But someone else had seen Lily, and someone had stopped, and someone had stayed, and that made all the difference. That moment was not loud or dramatic, but it was everything, and it was just the beginning of something very important. Because sometimes the smallest kindness is the one that saves you. The air in the park felt softer now, and the loudness had faded just a little as Daniel sat beside the little girl and gently blew more bubbles into the open sky. Lily was still sitting close to the ground, but she was no longer holding her knees, and her hands were now resting on the grass beside her toy bunny. She was watching the bubbles float and dance in the light, and her small eyes followed each one like they were stars in the daytime sky. Daniel's son Max reached out and caught a bubble and laughed in a quiet way and looked at Lily like he wanted her to laugh too. Lily didn't laugh, but she smiled just enough to let him know she liked the bubbles, and maybe she liked that he was sitting there too. Daniel spoke again in his soft voice and said, "When Max was little, he used to get really scared, and I didn't know what to do, and I made a lot of mistakes at first." He looked at Lily, then said, "But then we found something that helped, and it wasn't anything big or special, just bubbles, just something slow and light and fun." Lily tilted her head a little and looked at Max, who was still catching bubbles and letting them go and not saying anything loud or fast. She looked back at Daniel, and he smiled and said, "You're doing great. You know you're really strong, even if it doesn't feel that way right now." Lily blinked a few times like her eyes were remembering how to feel calm again, and she picked up her bunny and held it close to her chest. Daniel didn't ask her any questions, and he didn't tell her to talk, and he didn't try to fix her. He just kept being there with her, like a tree that gives shade when the sun is too hot. Max got up and handed Lily a small yellow bubble wand from his pocket and said, "Here, you can try if you want." Lily looked at the wand and then at Max, and then back at the bubbles, and slowly reached out and took it from his hand. Her fingers were still a little shaky, but she dipped the wand into the bottle and brought it to her lips and blew gently. The first bubble popped too fast, but the second one floated, and Max clapped softly like it was the best bubble he had ever seen. Daniel laughed and said, "Wow, that one was magic, I can tell." Lily looked surprised, like she didn't expect anyone to be proud of her for blowing a bubble, and for a second her smile grew just a little bit wider. Then something changed behind them, and everything slowed down. A sharp voice came from a few steps away and said, "Lily, what are you doing, and who is that man?" It was her mother walking toward them, faster heels clicking on the path, and her phone finally out of her hand. Lily froze again for a moment and hugged her bunny tight and looked down at the ground like she had done something wrong. Daniel stood up slowly and didn't say anything at first, because he knew that fear could return in a blink, and he didn't want that to happen. Her mother reached them and looked at Daniel with eyes full of confusion and worry and said, "Excuse me, what is going on here? Why is my daughter sitting on the ground with strangers?" Daniel kept his voice calm and kind and said she looked scared, so I sat with her and helped her breathe. "I hope that's okay." Lily's mom looked down at her daughter and noticed for the first time how red her eyes were and how tightly she was holding her toy. She knelt beside Lily and touched her shoulder and said, "Baby, are you okay? What happened?" Lily didn't speak, but she leaned into her mom's touch and whispered, "He helped me," and then she pointed at Daniel. The mother looked at Daniel again, and her face changed just a little from cold to soft, and she said, "Thank you, I didn't see, I didn't know." Daniel nodded and said, "It's all right, we all get busy, sometimes I just happen to be in the right place." Max smiled and waved at Lily and said, "Bye, see you next time, maybe we can blow more bubbles," and Lily waved back very slowly, but didn't say anything. Daniel and Max walked away, and the mother sat with Lily on the grass for the first time since they came to the park. She held her close and looked at the sky and didn't reach for her phone. And though no one said it out loud, something important had just happened, and everything after this moment would be a little bit different. Because a stranger had stepped in, and a little girl had found peace, and a mother had finally seen what really mattered. Lily sat quietly next to her mother on the soft grass, and everything around her still moved the same way, but something inside her had changed. The loud noise in her chest had faded, and the spinning in her head had slowed, and the world no longer felt like it was crashing into her all at once. Her mother was not talking on her phone anymore, and for the first time in a very long time she was not typing or nodding or walking in fast circles. She was just sitting still with her arm around Lily, holding her gently and looking down at her face like she was seeing it for the first time in forever. They both watched Daniel and Max walk away down the path with the sun behind them and the bottle of bubbles swinging from Max's hand. Lily's fingers were still holding the small yellow wand that Max had given her, and she looked at it like it was something made of gold and magic and light. Her mother looked at it too, and asked softly, "Did you like the bubbles?" And Lily nodded with her bunny still tucked under her arm. There was a pause where neither of them said anything, and the quiet between them was not heavy or cold, but soft and kind like a blanket around the shoulders. Her mother sighed and looked out across the park and said, "I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't even notice you were scared, and I'm so sorry." Lily didn't say anything, but she leaned closer to her mother and rested her head on her shoulder, and that was enough to say, "I forgive you." Nearby, a small boy was laughing while chasing butterflies, and a group of kids were playing tag, and the wind was carrying the scent of fresh grass and warm bread from the bakery cart. Lily's mother closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she looked at Lily and said, "Sometimes I forget to slow down, and that's not fair to you." Lily looked up at her with eyes that were soft and tired, but calm, and she whispered, "I missed you." And those 3 words broke something inside the mother, not in a painful way, but in a true and needed way, like when a glass cracks, and you finally see the reflection more clearly. She pulled Lily into a full hug and held her close and said, "I missed you too, more than you know." They sat like that for a long time, not moving, not rushing, just being there together while the park moved gently around them like a soft river. Then Lily held up the bubble wand and said, "Can we blow some?" And her mother smiled and said, "Of course, show me how." Lily dipped the wand into the bottle and held it up and blew slowly, and the bubble grew and floated up into the air like a tiny sun made of soap and breath and wonder. Her mother clapped gently and said, "Wow, that was beautiful," and Lily giggled for the first time that day, and the sound was like bells in the wind. They took turns blowing bubbles and watching them float and pop and twist through the air, and sometimes they didn't speak for minutes, and it still felt full and happy. At one point Lily said, "Daniel said bubbles are good when things feel too big," and her mother nodded and said he was right, they help you breathe and focus on something small and kind. More people passed by, and some smiled when they saw the bubbles, and some stopped to watch, and one child even clapped when a bubble landed on his hand and didn't pop right away. Lily noticed how other people were smiling now, and she said, "I think bubbles make the whole world better," and her mother laughed and said, "Maybe we should carry bubbles with us every day." They stayed at the park longer than usual, and no phone calls came, and no emails were checked, and no meetings were rushed into, and nothing was more important than that moment. As the sun began to lower and the shadows grew longer, the mother packed the bunny and the bubble wand into her purse and said, "Let's come back here again tomorrow." Lily smiled and held her mother's hand, and for the first time she didn't feel nervous about going outside again, because she knew her mother had really seen her this time. They walked slowly toward the gate, passing the bench where Daniel had once sat, and for a moment Lily stopped and turned back and looked across the playground. She didn't see Daniel or Max, but she whispered "thank you" under her breath, like a secret prayer carried by the wind. And the wind answered with a single bubble that floated from behind a tree and danced across the sky just for her. Because sometimes healing comes not from big things, but from a soft word, a slow breath, and the simple joy of a bubble in the air. The next day the sun rose early and bright, and the city moved fast like always, with cars and people and noise in every corner. But inside one quiet apartment something was different, and someone had changed in a way no one else could see except a little girl with big brown eyes. Lily's mother woke up and didn't reach for her phone right away, and didn't check emails or meetings or news before breakfast. She walked into Lily's room and found her sitting on the floor with her toy bunny and the yellow bubble wand resting beside her pillow. The mother sat beside her daughter and brushed her hair gently and said, "Do you want to go to the park again today?" Lily looked up surprised but happy and nodded without saying a word, and her mother smiled and said, "This time I'll bring the bubbles too." They got dressed slowly, without rush, and walked hand in hand down the city sidewalk, and this time the phone stayed deep in her purse without a sound. The park was full of life again, with dogs barking and children laughing, and the sound of wheels from bikes and scooters zipping across the paths. But for Lily, everything felt softer now, because her mother was really there walking beside her, not just in body, but in heart and mind. They reached the bench near the playground and sat down, and Lily took out the bubble wand and held it up like a magic wand and smiled. Her mother pulled out the small bottle Daniel had left behind the day before and opened it carefully and dipped the wand and said, "Like this, right?" Lily nodded and said, "Blow slow and gentle, not too fast, or it won't work," and her mother did just that. The bubble floated into the air, and Lily clapped and said, "That's perfect," and her mother laughed with real joy in her voice. They took turns making bubbles, and sometimes they didn't speak at all, just watched the little orbs dance and pop in the wind like tiny gifts from the sky. Then a woman walked by holding a coffee cup and said, "Oh, how sweet," and Lily's mother smiled and said, "We just started this yesterday, and it changed everything." The woman nodded and kept walking, but the words stayed floating in the air just like the bubbles. After a while Lily sat quietly and looked at the grass and said in a soft voice, "Do you think he'll come back today?" Her mother didn't ask who she meant, because she already knew, and she looked around the park and said, "Maybe, if not today, maybe soon." Lily nodded and said, "I liked him and his little boy, and they made me feel safe," and her mother said, "Me too, and I didn't even know I needed that." Then something happened that made both of them freeze for a second. Daniel appeared on the path, holding Max's hand, and walking slowly toward the same bench as yesterday. He didn't look surprised to see them, he just smiled like he had hoped they would be there, and he said good morning. Lily ran up to Max and showed him the bubble wand, and said I still have it, and I've been practicing, and Max grinned and said I knew you would. Daniel looked at Lily's mother and said I'm glad to see you again, and she stood up and said I wanted to say thank you in person. He nodded and said you're welcome, and she paused then said I didn't realize how disconnected I was from her, I didn't realize she was hurting like that. Daniel said sometimes the world moves too fast, and we forget to look at the people right in front of us. I've been there too. The mother looked at Lily and said I'm learning now, and I think it's time to slow down and make room for quiet and soft things like this. Max handed Lily a second wand and said now we can make double bubbles, and Lily giggled and said let's see who can make the biggest one. They all sat together on the grass, not as strangers anymore, but as something closer, like people who shared something quiet and important. Daniel blew a bubble and said sometimes it's not about fixing the fear, but just being there with someone while they feel it, and her mother nodded and said yes, that's what I missed. More bubbles floated into the air and caught the sunlight, and the breeze carried them across the playground where other children began to notice and join the fun. Soon the whole park seemed to glow with little bursts of light as bubbles filled the space between strangers and laughter echoed across the grass. And in the middle of it all sat a little girl who had once frozen in fear and now felt seen and safe and held. Because one man had stopped and one mother had listened and one child had dared to blow a bubble when the world felt too heavy. And in that simple act something inside all of them had changed. The park slowly became quiet as the sun started to move lower in the sky, and the soft orange light made everything glow like a dream that didn't want to end. Lily sat under a tall tree with Max beside her and the empty bubble bottles resting in the grass like treasure chests that had shared all their magic for the day. Her mother and Daniel sat nearby, watching the two children laugh and talk and chase one last bubble that floated just high enough to keep them reaching. It was peaceful and light and full of the kind of silence that feels safe, not lonely, the kind that lets hearts breathe. Lily leaned against the tree and said in a quiet voice, I didn't know grown-ups could be kind like you, and Max's dad and her mother heard the words, and something inside her heart melted. She got up and walked to Lily and sat beside her and said, I didn't know either, but I want to learn from people like them and from you too. Daniel smiled from where he sat and said, kindness isn't hard, but it does take time and attention and the choice to slow down. Lily's mother nodded and said, I used to think success was about work and money and always being in control, but now I think real success is being present with the people you love. Max picked a small yellow flower from the grass and gave it to Lily, and she smiled and said thank you like it was the most beautiful gift in the world. Daniel stood up and said we should be going soon, but I wanted to say this has been one of the best days we've had in a long time. Lily looked sad for a moment and said, will I see you again? And Max said, of course, this park is our favorite place. Now it can be yours too. Lily's mother stood and said, maybe we can come back tomorrow or next weekend or any day that needs a little more softness and a little less rush. Daniel nodded and said, sounds perfect, and the two families said goodbye with small waves and warm smiles like old friends who had only just met. As Lily and her mother walked home, the city looked different to her. The buildings didn't seem so big, and the people didn't feel so far away. She held her mother's hand, and for the first time in a long time, that hand didn't feel busy or distracted or pulled by a phone or a meeting. It just felt like love. When they got home, Lily placed her bunny on her bed and put the bubble wand beside it and said, I want to keep it here, so I remember how strong I was. Her mother knelt beside her and said, I want to keep something too, and Lily asked what, and she said this moment. The next day Lily's mother woke up early again, but not for emails or meetings or calls. She made breakfast and packed 2 bubble bottles and a small blanket and said, let's go. And they went to the park together and sat on the same bench and blew bubbles and smiled at strangers and listened to birds and wind and children's laughter. Other people started noticing them, and one father asked, where did you get those bubbles? They're making my son smile. Lily's mother handed him one and said, they saved us, they helped my daughter find peace and helped me find her again. Soon the park was full of bubbles again, not just from Lily and Max, but from others too, and the air felt lighter and softer and kinder. Lily saw Daniel and Max from a distance, and they waved back, and even from far away the feeling was clear this was a family, now not by blood, but by care. And as the days passed and the seasons changed, Lily never forgot the day she sat frozen in fear, and a stranger with bubbles saw her and stayed. She never forgot how her mother changed, not with a big speech or a sudden promise, but with quiet actions and soft presence and time. And every time Lily saw a bubble float across the sky, she whispered a thank you to the wind, to Max, to Daniel, and to the part of herself that kept going even when it was hard. Because some stories don't need a hero in a cape or a loud ending. Sometimes the hero is the one who sees. Sometimes the hero is the one who stays. And sometimes the smallest thing, like a single bubble, can carry the biggest lesson all the way into someone's heart and never leave.